Hey, this is Christian Buckley, Microsoft Regional Director and Office Apps and Services MVP, and I'm interviewing today Dux Raymond Sy, so also a fellow Microsoft Regional Director, Office Apps and Services MVP, and Chief Brand Officer at AvePoint on the topic of driving Microsoft 365 adoption as part of the ESPC community. Dux, thanks so much for talking to me today.
Hey, Christian, thank you for having me. Always great to connect and shoot the breeze with you.
Well, this is a great topic. I know we've both written a ton about this. It's an important thing. I'm excited to see that adoption and engagement from Microsoft content is from the community. It's really grown in importance, and I think it's just as part of the maturity of the platform where people are worried less about toggles and switches and servers standing up and talking about actually using the technology. So let's jump right in. Here's question number one. So where should an organization get started in thinking about and taking action around adoption?
So first and foremost, it's not about the technology. You got to step back and think about how your organization works and essentially establish your rules of engagement, right? Not every organization is the same. It's not a one size fits all. I mean, I'm done with people saying, well, you don't have to use Yammer, you got to use Teams. And no. Don't talk about technology first. Talk about how you operate. So for example, for our organization, we've set rules on how we use these technology to drive company engagement. Let's say I want to understand what's going on in the broader AvePoint family. We use Yammer for that. So that's our way of engaging with the rest of the company. We want to get work done. We want to collaborate. We want to talk. That's where teams come in. This is where our departments live and work. This is where our project teams live and work. And mind you, all of our teams are private because we don't want too many cooks in the kitchen. I know. Some companies are like, why don't you make it public? Anybody can join. It's just too messy, right? So our rule of thumb is if you want to get work done, we do it in teams. In any of the work that's completed, that's ready for prime time, that we want the rest of the organization to consume and use, that's where we stick into SharePoint, because we use SharePoint as essentially our knowledge repository. That's where our intranet is. So let's say the marketing team works on a brochure, we work on it in Teams, we publish it on our SharePoint intranet, and then people will hear about it on Yammer. So that's an example of what I mean by having a standard set of rules on how we use these technology. And that is very, very important to get started with driving adoption.
You know, part of it too is that you didn't mention the word, culture, but understanding what the culture is of your organization, that's usually a place to begin as well. Why have we been doing it this way in the past? What actually works? That's going to impact whether things stick as well. Is how far outside of the current culture is this new process or the technology, and so the more that you can adhere to and adapt around the collaboration culture, the more likely that is to stick and to be sustainable.
100%. And I love when you said adapting, because look, times change, people change, right? At one point, I loved 70s disco music. I don't care for it anymore because
come on, really?
I used to love Bee Gees, but these days I'm into different things. But anyway, it's good. So to your point around culture and adapting, one of the key things too, as you adapt to something new, you got to make sure you make it easy for people to do the right thing as well. Just by throwing new technologies on top of current things that they do is not the answer. So if we're saying we're going to use Team to communicate and collaborate, guess what? We're not going to use on-prem SharePoint anymore. We're not going to use group email anymore. So you got to take away the old ways, and certainly whatever you do that's new should be better, easier, and faster.
Well, that's a good segue to question number two. Where does governance fit into adoption?
So look, the way we think about governance, at least from people I talk to, or at least perception of folks that are not familiar, is always this big, daunting, scary, hard thing. Actually, good governance precedes good adoption. They come hand in hand. And the reason being is what we're trying to do with having a solid governance strategy for Microsoft 365 is we want to make it easy for people to do the right thing. Because no matter how many times you tell people, well, when you create a team, make sure you don't call it this, or make sure you don't change permissions in your SharePoint site, people will not remember. People aren't malicious, but there's too much stuff to remember. So what you do is you use all the capabilities that Microsoft 365 offers so that not only can you define what governance policies you have, you enforce it as well. And these policies revolve around how do you provision workspaces? Who can do it? Who can't do it? How do you enable policy enforcement so that when Christian owns a team, he doesn't randomly creates a bunch of subsite or invites external users. And then the last bit is how do you govern information lifecycle? What happens once the team is done? Does it just sit there, or are you bounded by GDPR, for example, where you need to get rid of information after a period of time? So these are the things you have to consider and put in place, because once it's in place and it takes care of itself, the less people will have to remember, the easier for them to adopt.
You know, one thing I'll kind of draw the culture card again around this. Your bedside manner, how you approach the community management aspect of governance is a key to the ongoing success of that. Because if you treat everything like, you know, governance is a stick and you just did something wrong and I whack you on the back of the hand with it, versus, hey, let's have a conversation about so you did this and this is how this breaks this. What are you actually trying to accomplish? You might uncover as part of that process. So this is as much change management it is governance process. You might discover that, hey, they're actually trying to do a scenario that's something that we didn't map. We didn't fully understand that capability. We may need to go make changes. Part of that evolution of, you know, you can't build the technology once and be done and walk away. It's going to be this ongoing evolution that happens. But it's, you know, so how you approach governance is as important as the governance itself.
Absolutely. And the other thing too is it's not a one size fits all, even within your organization, right? Sure, we can set up some rules at the tenant level. We're not going to allow credit card number to be visible throughout the company, which is great. But then at the next level, different business units have different policies and regulations they have to adhere to. Let's say the legal team, they may need more stringent governance policies versus the marketing team, right? So you don't stop at that level. You move down, as you mentioned, making sure you have that conversation, understanding what the business needs are, and through technology, automate and enforce those governance requirements.
Okay, question number 3. So how do you sustain adoption in Microsoft 365?
You know, back in my on-prem days, back in my days, I used to think adoption is spelled as TRAINING, right? That is adoption. Hey, Christian, we're going to roll out SharePoint 2007 next week. What about adoption? Oh, we'll send people to a 3-day training, right? Or we're going to make them read a book written by Andrew Cano. Well, that doesn't cut it.
We don't want to do that, force anybody to do that.
So if you all haven't come across this research, it's called the Diffusion of Innovation. I encourage you all to look it up. It's essentially a study of how long organizations take to adopt an enterprise technology such as Microsoft 365. And this was a worldwide research for government and private institutions. And guess how long the average time frame organizations would adopt, assuming you already have an adoption strategy in place. You want to take a guess, Christian?
No idea. I don't know.
Take
3 months? 3 months?
12 to 18 months.
Wow.
Organization-wide, to achieve full adoption, it's about 12 to 18 months for an enterprise platform like Microsoft 365. So what does that tell us? That tells us that sending people to a one-time event, training, or watching a video one time does not cut it. At most, you get about 34% of your organizations to adopt, but 34% is not good enough. So the idea of driving sustainable adoption strategy is really thinking about, okay, in the next 12 to 18 months, what kind of enablement resources will I offer? Certainly training is important. What kind of support? What's my tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 support look like? Because as people start using it, they're going to have questions. In the old model where we just ask IT for everything, it's not sustainable, it's not scalable. So how can you start thinking about activating champions or having a community-based type of support mechanism so people can learn from each other? The third thing you want to consider is from a technical perspective. In the next 12 to 18 months, how can you introduce new features or capabilities? So maybe when you start rolling it, when you start enabling your platform, you may not introduce Power Platform yet. You know, people are start using the Teams, but then month 3, as people mature, let's turn on Power Automate. Let's start teaching them Power Apps. So have these different milestones and strategy so that in the next 12 to 18 months, you can sustain that growth and not be stale where back in the days of SharePoint on-prem again, what did people use SharePoint for? It's nothing but a file dump, right? People did not really mature and took advantage of all the goodness of SharePoint.
Well, that's what so much of it. I'll even go back further than that. I know you lived in the world as well, where I was given the standards binder, the 3-ring binder that had all the policies, and would go and ask questions and constantly be redirected. Well, that's in the binders. Like, can we just discuss here right now, have a conversation? But and in the early days of SharePoint on-prem, we go create a governance team site, and people would go and dump information there, and then you'd notice that, oh, it was last populated or last updated 7 months ago, and and since then we've onboarded half of our end users. It's not kept up. It needs to be this living, breathing process, not just a site, not a binder, certainly, where you point people to go look up the guidance. But it should be, it kind of incorporate all of different, you've got documented your policies and procedures. It has the training resources. It should highlight who are the champions in my organization so I can make it very easy to go find people who are the experts, have the social action. So whether that's a site or a selection of sites, or it's in in your portal, it has Yammer parts and SharePoint components and Teams is in there. It's like the technologies are relevant. It's about having what fits the culture of your organization. I'm a big culture guy, but that fits the culture of our organization, but is that ongoing, evolving, living, breathing, moving, evolution of, here's the guidance, the guiding principles around governance. Here's the hard and fast compliance security rules. And then here's all the discussion around these things to help you apply it to what you're doing day to day.
Absolutely. And certainly the idea of sustaining it through time has to be contextual as well, right? You describe about that binder. Let me ask you this, not to put you front and center, but have you ever read the US Constitution from page to page?
I did.
You did.
In high school.
Well, good for you, right?
Yeah.
For me, I'm ashamed to admit it. I attempted it once, but I didn't finish it because I know that the Constitution is there. It governs how our country operates. I know it protects me as an American citizen, but I'm like, you know what? A bunch of stuff's not relevant to me. Maybe one day if I go to court, I'll read it, but for now, it's just there.
However, I believe it's been OCR'd. I believe you can. It's searchable text now.
Yeah.
So when you need to, go search on those things.
But look, Christian, I know the governance around the stoplight. When it's red, I stop. I know the governance of where to park during certain days, or else my car would be towed. I know the governance that during the week I should be home by 10 p.m., or else upper management, my wife, would have a problem with that. So, point being is, you see, you can't just hit people on the head with this stick binder. It has to be relevant with our day-to-day experiences, and also understanding what the rewards are and what the consequences are as well.
I like that analogy of the traffic. There's traffic cops that are out there. So if you do something, if you're speeding, that they come and they might let you off. They could penalize you that. But even so, you have to make sure on a yearly basis that you have insurance, that your vehicle is registered. Every couple of years, you may have to do a driving test again. You do the eye test. So you have those different ways. That to me is also part of adoption, is making sure that my skills are keeping up with where the technology has gone, to be quizzed on, to make sure that I understand what are our corporate guidelines around governance. So there's something, it's not just a stick. that there's the community management, that side of it. Training is a huge part of that, but we play a role in it. We're not just going and consuming something and being told what to do and what not to do, but we play an active role in that.
And it changes through time too, as we've seen how the platform evolved and how we work, for that matter. The last 6 months, we're all working from home, right? So a lot of this model can change and can shift, and you don't have to like disco music from the 70s.
You don't have to. That's a good point to end on. Dux, thanks so much for your time today. Important topic. For those that are watching the rest of the ESPC conference, so be sure to check out Dux's session and his workshop, and we'll talk to you soon.